I was never meant to be a prisoner. The battle that changed humanity's destiny in the stars. The transport ship hummed steadily as it cut through the vast expanse of space. A deep, oppressive silence filled the cramped quarters of the ship, broken only by the rhythmic hum of its engines. Inside, Aliya Zaire sat chained to a cold metal chair, her sharp eyes scanning every detail of her surroundings. The flickering lights cast harsh shadows on her face, emphasizing the lines of tension beneath her calm exterior. Her long black hair, once kept in a tight braid during her time as a soldier, now hung loosely around her shoulders, a sign of the disarray she had been forced to endure. The once pristine, high-tech combat armor she wore, designed to withstand the harshest environments, was now a faded and battered version of its former glory. Aliya Zaire was not just another convict. Her crime, labeled as destroying interdimensional peace, was a convenient lie. No, Aliya wasn't a criminal, not in the sense that the universe thought. She had been sent to Zeta 56 for a far more dangerous mission, one that involved infiltrating the deepest, most secure prison in the galaxy, Zeta 56. A prison designed for the most dangerous beings, a place where the worst of the worst were kept behind layers of impenetrable security. "How long do you think you'll last in there, soldier?" The voice of the transport captain broke the silence. His tone was cold, almost mocking, though he didn't look back at her. He had seen enough prisoners to be indifferent, even to someone as dangerous as Aliya. She didn't respond immediately, her eyes narrowing slightly as she leaned back in her seat. Her mission wasn't about survival, it was about extracting information from someone who could potentially destroy everything she had fought for. A part of her wanted to speak, to lash out, but she knew better. Staying composed was the key. Aliya was not here by choice. She had been an elite soldier, trained by the best of Terra's military forces, a force to be reckoned with in the intergalactic war. But her true assignment had been different. The government, which had long been monitoring a vicious intergalactic crime syndicate, had identified one of its most dangerous members being held within Zeta 56, a prisoner by the name of Zoran. Zoran was a high-ranking member of a criminal organization, a group so elusive that it had managed to evade capture for years. Aliya's mission had always been clear: infiltrate Zeta 56, be imprisoned, and gather the intel needed to bring down the syndicate from the inside. She knew the organization would try to stop her at all costs, but she had to succeed. Zoran was the key to everything. The ship's engines slowed as they neared the prison. Aliya could see the distant structure of Zeta 56 through the small viewport of the transport craft. The prison looked like a jagged, metallic monolith, casting a cold, intimidating shadow against the backdrop of the void. Zeta 56 wasn't just a prison, it was a fortress, designed not just to contain prisoners, but to keep them from ever escaping. Approaching Zeta 56, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Aliya's heart rate didn't change, her calm demeanor never faltering as the ship entered the gravitational pull of the station. She knew what she had to do. Zeta 56 was an isolated, heavily fortified facility, a place known throughout the galaxy for housing the most dangerous and violent criminals. Built into an asteroid belt, the station's architecture was designed to be both impenetrable and virtually invisible to anyone trying to access it. A perimeter of security drones circled the area like a swarm of vultures, ensuring that no one could approach unnoticed. The walls were lined with energy shields and weaponry so advanced that it was said even the most advanced forces would have little chance against it. The guards wore special armor designed to withstand all but the most extreme forms of attack. Escape was impossible, but it was within this fortress that Aliya had to make her move. Her target, Zoran, had been locked up here for years. His organization believed that he was still valuable, but they had no idea that he had been left to rot in a cell, ignored and forgotten by those who once trusted him. Aliya's plan was simple: pose as a prisoner, gather information, and get out. What they didn't know was that she wasn't here to serve time. She was here to take it. Her mission was dangerous, her cover fragile. To get in, she had to fake her own guilt, to pretend that she was just another criminal trying to blend in among the most ruthless and treacherous individuals in the galaxy. Aliya had been framed for a crime she didn't commit. The charge? destroying interdimensional peace. It was a fabricated story, a lie the government used to justify her being sent to Zeta 56. She had never harmed the peace between worlds. No, the real threat she posed was the knowledge she had, the intel about the criminal syndicate that she had uncovered while working with an undercover team. The government couldn't risk letting the syndicate learn that their operations had been compromised, and so they had to hide the truth about her mission. They couldn't afford to let anyone know that she had been working to bring down one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the galaxy. The ship touched down with a soft thud, and the hatch slowly creaked open. A blast of cold air swept through the cabin as the prison guards entered. Clad in dark, matte black armor, they moved with precision, their expressions hidden behind the visors of their helmets. One of them stepped forward and issued the standard command, "Stand up!" Aliya's movements were swift but controlled as she rose from her seat. The chains that bound her wrists and ankles clinked in the silent atmosphere. She could feel the weight of her new reality, the burden of this mission pressing on her shoulders. As the guards led her down the narrow metallic corridor of the transport ship, she couldn't help but notice how eerily quiet everything was. Zeta 56 was silent, almost unnervingly so. The prison's infrastructure was designed to be a tomb, a place where those locked inside were left to rot, forgotten by the rest of the universe. The silence of it all only served to remind her of what she was walking into. The guards didn't speak as they escorted her through the heavy doors of Zeta 56. Aliya's eyes narrowed as she scanned the facility. This place wasn't just a prison, it was a fortress, a carefully controlled environment where nothing could escape. The lights overhead were dim, casting long shadows along the cold metallic walls. Aliya's heart skipped a beat as she walked deeper into the facility. The thick air of isolation surrounded her, and for a brief moment, she wondered if she was truly prepared for what was to come. They stopped in front of a cell, a small, heavily secured room where Aliya would be held. Her eyes flickered to the narrow window, the tiny sliver of space where she could see nothing but an endless void. There was no escape here, not without the right key, and she had none. But Aliya wasn't concerned with escape. She had another way out, Zoran. As the guards locked her into the cell, Aliya's mind raced. She couldn't afford to waste time. The sooner she could make contact with Zoran, the better. She needed to get close to him, to gain his trust. But Zoran wasn't just any prisoner. He was a high-ranking member of the organization Aliya had been tasked to infiltrate. He knew things, dangerous things, and she had to extract that information before it was too late. The door slammed shut with a resounding clang, and Aliya was left in the silence of her cell. She sat on the edge of the cot, her back straight, her posture as composed as ever. She had a mission, and no matter the obstacles, she would complete it. Zeta 56 might be a fortress, but it wasn't invincible, and neither was the organization that ran it. Outside her cell, the guards moved with practiced indifference, their heavy boots echoing in the corridors. The atmosphere was thick with tension, but Aliya didn't allow herself to get lost in it. She had one objective now: to get to Zoran, and once she did, the Syndicate would never know what hit them. Her mind was already working on the next phase of the plan, making contact with Zoran, gaining his trust, and uncovering the secrets that would bring down the entire criminal empire. The silence of Zeta 56 was only temporary. Soon it would be shattered, and Aliya Zaire would be the one to do it. Aliya Zaire sat silently in her cell, her back straight, posture unwavering as she stared at the small, flickering light above her. The hum of the Zeta 56 prison system reverberated through the walls like a constant reminder of her captivity. The guards had placed her in a solitary cell at first, likely to observe her, to test whether she was truly just another convict. The heavy metal doors clanged shut, and for a brief moment, the weight of her mission felt suffocating. She had to gather information, break down the walls of secrecy that Zeta 56 had constructed, and do it all without drawing attention. She wasn't just a prisoner, she was an agent in disguise, and soon she would have her first real encounter with one of the prison's key players, Evan Hanks. Evan Hanks was the Earthborn guard assigned to oversee the prisoners in Zeta 56. His stern expression and controlled movements a sign of the discipline instilled in him. He had been trained for years in the art of surveillance and containment, Yet nothing in his training had prepared him for Aliya Zaire. She wasn't just another convict. There was something about her that made him uneasy, something hidden beneath the calm, collected surface. He wasn't sure if it was the way she moved or the intensity in her gaze, but there was no mistaking it. Aliya wasn't like the other prisoners. Evan's role here was simple: to monitor, manage, and ensure that the most dangerous criminals in the galaxy stayed under lock and key. He was well aware of the importance of his job. Zeta 56 was no ordinary prison. It housed the worst of the worst, individuals so dangerous they couldn't be trusted in any normal facility. His responsibility was not only to maintain order, but also to gather intelligence on the prisoners, ensuring that they didn't organize or form alliances that could jeopardize the delicate balance of power within the prison. When Evan first met Aliya, he had no idea that her true identity was far more complex than he could imagine. She was brought in under the guise of a simple criminal, a woman convicted of destroying interdimensional peace, a crime so vague it could mean almost anything. It wasn't his place to question the charges or to delve into the intricacies of her case. He was a soldier, not a detective, and his mission was to ensure that she served her time without causing too much trouble. But as the days passed, Evan began to notice something strange. Aliya, despite being in prison, carried herself differently from the others. There was a calmness to her, a quiet strength that seemed to resonate in everything she did. She wasn't fearful or anxious like the others. Instead, she held a quiet intensity in her every movement. This made him uneasy. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. Days after her arrival, Evan was assigned to supervise her first interaction with other prisoners. He watched her closely, observing how she handled herself when faced with a group of rough criminals. Aliya stood tall and composed, her back straight as she listened to the taunts and jeers from the other inmates. She didn't flinch when one of the prisoners attempted to provoke her, instead responding with a calmness that unnerved everyone around her. Evan could feel the tension rise. He had seen prisoners who reacted violently to the smallest provocation, but not Aliya. She wasn't just enduring this, she was controlling it. "Don't get too comfortable, convict," one of the inmates sneered at her. "You'll be here for a while. The longer you stay, the worse it gets." Aliya didn't respond immediately. She studied the inmate for a moment, her eyes narrowing. Then, with a subtle shift in posture, she replied, her voice steady but firm. "It doesn't matter how long I stay. I'll be out when I'm ready." Evan's heart skipped a beat. There was something about the way she spoke, calm yet unyielding, that made him wonder if she was someone he should be watching more closely. The more Evan observed her, the more he began to question the official story. Something didn't add up. Aliya's behavior was too controlled, too deliberate. It wasn't typical for someone who had just been sentenced to such a high-security facility. It was clear to Evan that she wasn't just a criminal. But what was she really doing here? Was she planning something? Was she another spy, like the ones the authorities had warned him about? Aliya, for her part, had quickly realized that her presence in Zeta 56 was not going unnoticed. Evan's eyes were constantly on her, his attention too sharp for it to be casual surveillance. It didn't take long for her to deduce that the man monitoring her wasn't just another prison guard. There was something different about him, his movements, the way he conducted himself. He wasn't just there to oversee the prisoners. He was a player in a larger game. But the question was, whose side was he on? It was clear to her that Evan's role in the prison wasn't just about keeping the inmates in check. He was someone with his own motives, his own agenda. Aliya's plan had always been to extract information from Zoran, but Evan's presence complicated things. She couldn't afford to let him get too close, not until she understood who he was and what he wanted. As days passed, Aliya began to test the waters, subtly probing Evan's behavior. She wasn't sure if he was aware of her true mission, but she suspected he had some suspicions. The more she interacted with him, the more she realized that Evan wasn't entirely on the same page as the prison authorities. He wasn't just doing his job, he was involved in something bigger. But what was it? Could he be an ally? Or was he a potential threat? Evan, meanwhile, found himself conflicted. He had been trained to see prisoners as nothing more than numbers, as faceless threats to be managed. But Aliya, she wasn't like the others. There was something about her, something that gnawed at him. She didn't fit the mold of a typical criminal. Her eyes were too sharp, her movements too calculated. Every time she looked at him, it felt as though she were peeling back layers of his own life, exposing things he wasn't ready to confront. One evening, as Aliya was led back to her cell after a routine check, Evan caught up with her in the corridor. He moved quickly, blocking her path with the kind of casual authority he had perfected over the years. Aliya stopped, meeting his gaze. There was a moment of silence, thick with tension, before Evan spoke. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice low but insistent. "You're not like the others. You don't act like a typical prisoner. What's your real game, Aliya?" Aliya studied him for a moment, her lips curling into a faint smile. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when the pressure would finally reach its breaking point. She knew that Evan had been watching her closely, and now it was time to test whether he could be trusted. "Does it matter?" she replied, her voice smooth and confident. "I'm a prisoner. That's all you need to know." Evan's eyes narrowed. "I don't believe you," he said, his voice tinged with suspicion. "I know something's off about you, but whatever it is, I'll find out. I always do." Aliya's smile widened, but there was no humor in it. "We'll see, won't we?" Evan didn't respond, stepping aside to allow her to pass. But as he watched her walk away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just encountered someone far more dangerous than any prisoner he had ever met. The next few days were filled with tension as Aliya continued to navigate the delicate balance between cooperation and suspicion with Evan. The more she interacted with him, the more she realized that he was just as much a part of this twisted game as she was. The lines between ally and enemy began to blur, and Aliya understood that she would have to decide. Could she trust Evan enough to bring him into her mission? Or would his growing curiosity be the thing that brought her down? Their relationship, strained and uncertain, would be crucial in the coming days. If they were to work together, they would need to rely on each other more than they ever expected. For Aliya, the clock was ticking, and every moment brought her closer to the heart of Zeta 56's secrets and the dark truth about Zoran. The corridors of Zeta 56 felt like they stretched endlessly in all directions. Aliya could sense the heaviness of the place, an air of silence and containment that hung in the thick, recycled atmosphere. The walls were stark, metallic, and cold, their surface pockmarked by countless years of constant use. Zeta 56 was no ordinary prison, it was a fortress. Built into the heart of a rogue asteroid, the facility was designed to hold the most dangerous criminals in the galaxy, and it did so with relentless precision. Every inch of this place was covered in layers of security, both visible and hidden, making it nearly impossible to break free from. Aliya had read the specs before, studied the blueprints during her briefing, but nothing could prepare her for the reality of it. The security measures alone were enough to make most prisoners surrender, but Aliya knew that if she was to succeed in her mission, she would need to find weaknesses where none seemed to exist. The prison was protected by a vast array of advanced technologies. Shielding grids surrounded the outer walls, creating an invisible barrier against any outside intrusion. Laser turrets were mounted at regular intervals, their automated systems trained to detect even the smallest movement outside the perimeter. Inside the facility, the walls were lined with sensors capable of reading heart rates, body temperatures, and even detecting changes in brain activity. Zeta 56 was a place where escape was not just unlikely, it was unthinkable. But for someone like Aliya, who had been trained to think outside the box, even the most secure prison had its flaws. She spent the first few days of her incarceration observing the daily routines of the guards and the structure of the prison itself. The security systems were top-notch, but Aliya could see that they weren't perfect. The guards, despite their advanced training and seemingly unbreakable routines, had moments of distraction. There were glitches in the system, tiny blind spots in the coverage. She noted every detail, every mistake, every instance where the technology faltered, and stored it away for later. She was here for one reason: to extract information from a prisoner, Zoran, who was held deep inside the prison's most secure section. But before she could even think about reaching him, she needed to understand the layout of the facility and how she could move undetected through its complex web of security. Zoran was not just any inmate. Once a high-ranking member of a notorious criminal organization, that spanned across several galaxies. Zoran had been betrayed by his own people. The same organization that had once relied on him now saw him as expendable, a liability to be discarded. Aliya's mission was clear. She needed to gain Zoran's trust and extract vital information about the organization. What she didn't know, however, was just how complicated that would become. Zoran had been one of the most respected members of the Syndicate, a ruthless criminal organization that manipulated entire systems for profit. He was feared by many, his strategic mind and combat prowess making him an invaluable asset to the Syndicate. But over time, as his loyalty to the organization began to waver, Zoran had become a target. His betrayal of the Syndicate had cost him everything: his power, his allies, and his freedom. He had been abandoned, left to rot in the depths of Zeta 56, a forgotten pawn in a game he no longer wanted to play. The scars of his betrayal were evident in his eyes, a constant reminder of the cost of defection. He had come to terms with his fate, or so it seemed, but deep down, the rage of being cast aside simmered beneath the surface. Aliya had heard of Zoran, but she had never met him in person before her arrival at Zeta 56. As she learned more about him, she realized just how deeply his betrayal had affected him. Zoran was no longer the ruthless criminal he had once been. He had become a shadow of his former self, broken and distrustful. But there was something else lurking in his eyes, a spark that suggested he had not given up entirely. Was this the man who held the key to dismantling the Syndicate? Or was there more to him than met the eye? Aliya didn't know, but she had to find out. Over the course of several days, Aliya began to observe Zoran from afar, carefully studying his movements and interactions with the other prisoners. He was isolated, kept in a solitary cell away from the others, his interactions with the guards minimal at best. Yet there were moments, fleeting moments, when she could see the old fire in his eyes. He wasn't as broken as he appeared. Something about him seemed different, almost as if he were playing a game of his own, manipulating the situation to his advantage. Aliya knew that if she was going to make contact with him, she needed to be careful. Zoran had been betrayed before, and trust didn't come easily to someone who had been abandoned by his own people. But Aliya had a different approach. She wasn't here to force him into revealing what he knew. She was here to make him believe she was his ally. One evening, after the guards had made their rounds, Aliya made her move. She approached Zoran's cell, her movements swift and calculated. She knew the exact time when the guards would be distracted, when the systems would experience their brief glitches, and when she could slip through the cracks unnoticed. As she neared the cell, Zoran was sitting on his cot, staring out the small window that offered nothing but a view of the dark, endless space beyond. He didn't look up as she approached, but Aliya wasn't deterred. She cleared her throat softly, just loud enough to get his attention. "I've been watching you," Aliya said quietly. "You don't belong here." Zoran's eyes flicked to her, his expression unreadable. For a moment there was silence. Then with a slow, deliberate movement, he stood and approached the bars of his cell, his gaze fixed on hers. "You think I don't belong here?" he said, his voice a low growl. "Everyone belongs here in the end. Everyone who betrays." Aliya took a step closer, her gaze never wavering. "Not everyone who's been betrayed deserves to stay in a place like this." Zoran's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. "And what are you here for then? Are you another one of their spies come to finish me off?" "I'm not here to finish you off," Aliya replied, her voice steady. "I'm here to offer you something you've been missing." Zoran narrowed his eyes. "What could you possibly offer me?" "Information," Aliya said, her words deliberate, laced with intent. "The Syndicate, they're not finished with you. You know that, don't you? You may have been left for dead, but they have plans for you. They always do." Zoran's expression darkened. He took a step back, turning his gaze to the ground, as though considering her words. "They think I'm broken," he muttered under his breath. "But I know what they're planning." Aliya's heart raced. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The crack in the wall, the first sign that Zoran might actually be willing to help her. She knew she had to push further, to make him see that they were on the same side, even if he didn't fully understand that yet. "We can stop them," Aliya said, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "Together. You know the Syndicate inside and out. I can help you get out of here, but only if you help me take them down. This place, it's just the beginning. Zeta 56 isn't the end of this war. It's just the start. Zoran didn't reply immediately. For a moment, he simply stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Then with a sharp exhale, he spoke. You don't know what you're getting into. The Syndicate doesn't let go. Once they have you, they don't release you. But maybe you're right. Maybe there's still something left to fight for. Aliya held his gaze, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at her lips. There's always something left to fight for, Zoran. You just have to be willing to fight. As Zoran stepped back into the shadows of his cell, Aliya knew that this was just the beginning. She had gained his trust. But at what cost? What secrets did Zoran hold back? And what was he truly capable of? Aliya couldn't afford to let her guard down, not yet. The game was just beginning, and Zeta 56 was far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. But she had made her first move, and now it was time to see where this dangerous partnership would lead. Aliya Zaire had never been one to fade into the background, and in the confined metallic hallways of Zeta 56, that characteristic was beginning to make itself known. From the moment she stepped into the harsh, cold environment of the prison, Aliya knew she had to walk a fine line between staying under the radar and achieving her mission. But as the days passed, something began to change. Her body, trained for years in combat, was beginning to push its limits. Her reflexes were sharper, her strength increasing with every passing day. She could feel the surge within her, something powerful, something unnatural, but she didn't question it. She couldn't afford to. The mission was clear: infiltrate, gain information, and extract Zoran's secrets. But as she honed her physical abilities, she realized it was becoming harder to stay unnoticed. It wasn't long before the other inmates began to notice. Aliya's movements, always precise and calculated, had started to show signs of something more. When she lifted heavy objects with ease, when her fists landed with a force that made the walls tremble, whispers began to circulate. She could hear them from her cell at night, muffled conversations in the dark as prisoners speculated about her. "Who is she really?" they would whisper. "She's not like the others." But Aliya didn't let them see her discomfort. She had a job to do, and if her growing strength attracted attention, so be it. She would use it to her advantage. However, the guards were another matter. They were trained to notice the slightest deviation from the norm, and Aliya's increasing strength was now too noticeable to ignore. The first time a guard witnessed her breaking free of a minor restraint with nothing but sheer force, he had reported it immediately. Evan Hanks, the Earthborn supervisor, was the first to see the implications of what was happening. He had been keeping a close eye on Aliya since her arrival, and now he saw something that made him uneasy. She wasn't just a prisoner. She wasn't just pretending. There was something else inside her, something he couldn't place. As he watched her from behind the security screens, he felt a growing suspicion that something wasn't right. Aliya had become more than just a simple convict. She was a force of nature, and that terrified him. Evan had been in charge of the Zeta 56 security detail long enough to know that strength like Aliya's wasn't common among the general population of prisoners. He could see it in the way she carried herself, in the way she didn't flinch when the guards gave her orders. The other prisoners feared the authority of the guards, but not Aliya. She simply followed the rules when necessary, and when she didn't, the guards had no power over her. Her movements were too swift, too precise. It wasn't natural for someone in her position. Evan found himself questioning the narrative he'd been given. Aliya wasn't just a prisoner, she was something more, and that realization made him uneasy. One morning after a routine security sweep, Evan approached Aliya in the cafeteria. She sat alone, her posture perfect as always, but her eyes seemed far away, lost in thought. The usual sounds of the prisoners shouting and arguing seemed to fade as he stood in front of her, his presence forcing a shift in the atmosphere. Aliya didn't acknowledge him immediately, but he could feel her awareness of him, her eyes flicking toward him briefly before returning to her meal. "You're different," Evan said, his voice low, almost cautious. "I've been watching you." Aliya didn't look up at him, but her lips curved into a small smile. "What do you mean?" Evan crossed his arms over his chest, watching her carefully. You've been here long enough for me to notice. You're not like the other prisoners. You're stronger than you should be. You've been breaking restraints, lifting weights that the others can't even move. Aliya looked up then, meeting his gaze with a sharpness that made him take a small step back. Her smile faded. I'm just doing what I'm told. You don't just follow orders, Evan said, his voice growing more suspicious. Something's going on with you. Something you're not telling me. For a moment, Aliya was silent, her eyes calculating. She knew Evan was starting to suspect something, but she wasn't ready to reveal her hand, not yet. She had to keep him off balance to let him think she was just another prisoner. She leaned back in her chair, her voice calm, steady. I'm not a threat to you, Evan. I'm just trying to survive. Evan didn't answer right away, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. He could sense the layers in her words, the way they didn't quite fit with the image of a helpless prisoner. She wasn't here to serve her sentence. She was here for something else, something bigger, and that scared him. The more he watched her, the more he realized she was a player in a game that was far beyond him. As the days went on, Aliya's strength continued to grow. She would take part in the routine exercises, but her performance was unparalleled. Guards began to notice how effortlessly she moved through her physical routines, her body almost fluid, like a weapon in motion. They whispered about her behind their helmets, making bets on how long it would take before she broke under the pressure. But Aliya never broke. She never faltered. Instead, she adapted, growing stronger with every challenge she faced. Meanwhile, tensions in Zeta 56 continued to escalate. The inmates, sensing something was wrong, began to take notice of Aliya as well. Some viewed her as a potential ally, someone who could help them rise above the oppressive force of the guards. Others, however, saw her as a threat, someone whose growing power could disrupt the fragile balance within the prison walls. Aliya could feel the eyes of the other prisoners on her, could feel the whispers and the uncertainty building. The tension was palpable, and she knew it was only a matter of time before something gave. The guards, too, were becoming more cautious. They had never seen a prisoner like her before. Some of them, like Evan, were starting to question the true purpose of her imprisonment, but no one knew the truth. Aliya wasn't just a prisoner, she was a tool, a weapon, and she would use everything at her disposal to complete her mission. Evan, despite his growing doubts, still believed in his duty. His job was to monitor the prisoners, to keep them under control. But as Aliya's actions became more unpredictable, his suspicions deepened. Could she be planning something? Could she be a part of something bigger than the Syndicate? A player in a game that involved far more than just Zeta? 56? He didn't know, but he was determined to find out. The question was whether he could trust her, or if she was simply playing him like she was playing everyone else. As tensions reached a boiling point, Aliya knew she had to move fast. She could no longer afford to keep up the act of a helpless prisoner. She had to start making her move, taking advantage of her strength, of her influence. But she also knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed the prisoners to help her, to trust her, and for that, she would need to use her growing power to convince them. The guards, meanwhile, were beginning to crack under the pressure, especially Evan. His suspicion was palpable, and the closer he got to the truth, the more dangerous this delicate dance would become. The power dynamics within Zeta 56 were shifting, and Aliya was at the center of it all. The more she pushed her strength to the limit, the more the walls between her and the truth began to crumble. She knew that she was walking a fine line, and one wrong move could bring everything crashing down. But if she played her cards right, if she could manipulate the growing tension between the guards and the prisoners, she just might be able to use Zeta 56's secrets to her advantage. And in doing so, she would come closer to uncovering the true extent of the Syndicate's reach and the dark truth behind Zorn's betrayal. The corridors of Zeta 56 were eerily silent, save for the occasional hum of machinery or the footsteps of a passing guard. Aliya paced back and forth in her cell, her mind racing. She had been here for weeks now, observing, waiting, and planning. The walls of this prison were not just physical barriers. They were fortified with layers of technology, systems designed to prevent even the slightest breach. But Aliya had no intention of being a passive observer. She wasn't just here to collect information from Zoran. She was here to dismantle the very security that kept the truth hidden. If she was going to succeed, she needed to start breaking down the layers that protected Zeta 56. Evan Hanks, the Earthborn supervisor, had been watching her closely. His suspicion had grown over the past few days as he observed her movements and the increasing tension within the prison. Aliya was no ordinary prisoner, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper going on. She had shown herself to be resourceful and strong, far beyond what he expected from someone in her situation. But he had his orders: monitor the prisoners, maintain control. What he didn't know was that Aliya wasn't playing by the same rules. She wasn't here to break the law, she was here to break the system. The first crack in the fortress came when Aliya made her move to gain Evan's trust. He had been suspicious of her for weeks, but their recent interactions had started to shift something. She had carefully studied his habits, the way he walked, the way he observed the prisoners, and she knew exactly when to strike. One evening, as the security systems went into their routine cycle, Aliya made her approach. "Evan," she said, her voice low but firm, as she stood at the door to the guard station. "I need your help." Evan turned, his eyes narrowing. He had been expecting this moment. "What help? You've been playing me since day one, Aliya." "I haven't been playing you," she said, stepping closer. "I've been trying to get you to see the truth. I know you've been questioning the story they fed you. The whole thing, Zeta 56, the Syndicate, they're hiding something bigger, and I need you to help me get to it. I can't do it alone." Evan hesitated, the words clearly weighing on him. "And what makes you think I can trust you?" "Because you don't have a choice," Aliya replied, her voice steady. "The whole prison is about to implode, and if you're not on the right side, you'll be caught in the crossfire." He studied her for a moment, his mind racing. Was she really telling the truth? Was there more to this than the surface story of a simple criminal locked away for good? Something in her eyes told him she wasn't lying. She was desperate, but she wasn't without purpose. Finally, he nodded. "All right," he said, "I'll help, but this better not be some trick." Aliya gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I wouldn't do that." Their first plan was simple: hack into the prison's security systems. Zeta 56 had multiple layers of security, physical barriers, digital surveillance, and biometric scans. But it also had weak points. There was an outdated system in the control room, one that wasn't connected to the newer security upgrades, but it required a high-level clearance to access. Evan had the clearance, but he also knew the risks. Aliya was certain that with her combat and technical expertise, they could breach it, but it would require perfect timing and coordination. The plan was set in motion late at night. Aliya and Evan entered the control room when the guards were distracted by a small skirmish in the lower levels of the prison. They moved quickly, their steps light but calculated. Evan quickly bypassed the security lock on the door, and they slipped inside, the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights above their heads adding to the tension. Aliya took her place at the terminal, her fingers flying across the keys as she bypassed the first layer of the firewall. "I'm in," Aliya muttered, her focus unbroken. "I can access the surveillance feeds and the internal systems. Give me a few minutes to figure out the rest." Evan stood by the door, his eyes darting nervously to the hallway outside. "We don't have much time. The guards will be back soon." Aliya nodded, her eyes fixed on the terminal. The system wasn't as simple as she had hoped. Each time she made progress, a new obstacle appeared, a layer of protection more sophisticated than she had expected. As she delved deeper into the system, a cold feeling crept up her spine. There were security logs indicating unusual access attempts that had been erased. Someone was already trying to hack the system, someone who knew it inside out. But who? "Evan," she said, her voice tense. "This isn't what it seems. There's someone else already trying to break through." "What do you mean? Someone else?" "I don't know yet, but I'm starting to get the feeling we're not the only ones looking for answers." Evan's expression darkened. "That's not good. We need to get out of here now." But Aliya wasn't finished. She pushed deeper into the system, overriding the protocols that had been placed to prevent anyone from accessing sensitive files. The information was there: plans, coordinates, and files detailing the Syndicate's operations. But there was something else. something that made her pause. Zoran's name appeared on the screen. It wasn't just a mention of his incarceration. It was something more. His file contained encrypted messages, secret communications with figures outside the prison. The Syndicate hadn't just abandoned him, they were still in contact with him, using him as a pawn in a much larger game. She scanned through the files quickly, her heart racing. This wasn't just a simple mission anymore. Zoran was more than just an informant. He was a key player in something far bigger than she had imagined. Aliya was beginning to see the threads of a larger conspiracy, one that reached far beyond Zeta 56 and the Syndicate. The organization had plans that were more dangerous than anything she had thought possible. "Evan, we need to find Zoran. Now." "I knew something was off," Evan muttered. "But this? What are we dealing with?" Aliya turned to him, her eyes sharp with determination. "The Syndicate is planning something massive, something that could tear apart everything we know. We need to get to Zoran, and we need to do it fast." Just as she finished speaking, the door to the control room opened. A guard stood in the doorway, eyes wide with surprise. "What are you two doing here?" he barked. Without thinking, Aliya acted. She rushed forward, her speed and strength taking the guard by surprise. With a single swift motion, she knocked him unconscious, his body crumpling to the ground. Evan looked at her, his face a mixture of awe and fear. "You're not just a prisoner, are you?" he whispered. Aliya didn't respond. There was no time for explanations. She grabbed the data drive containing the encrypted files from the terminal and handed it to Evan. "We need to move, now." They rushed out of the room, moving quickly through the darkened hallways. The pressure was mounting. Everything was spiraling out of control. The more they uncovered, the more Aliya realized just how far-reaching the Syndicate's influence was. She had only scratched the surface, and now she was a part of something far bigger than she had ever imagined. As they made their way to Zoran's cell, the sense of urgency grew. The walls of Zeta 56 were closing in on them, but Aliya couldn't stop now. She had to stop the Syndicate, and she had to do it before they could enact their plan. The clock was ticking, and the game was only just beginning. The tension inside Zeta 56 had been simmering for weeks, but Aliya could feel it escalating. The daily routines that once felt like small obstacles were beginning to grow into full-blown confrontations. The guards who once viewed her as just another prisoner to be monitored were starting to watch her more closely, their suspicion creeping into their every action. Aliya had always been a step ahead, but the walls of Zeta 56, both literal and metaphorical, were closing in on her. She had already exposed a crack in the prison's security system, and now she was beginning to realize that the true battle would not just be against the Syndicate, but against the very people who had been tasked with keeping her locked away. The first sign of trouble came when a guard approached her during her daily exercise routine. Aliya had been running on the treadmill, her movements smooth and controlled, when the sound of footsteps interrupted her rhythm. She didn't have to look up to know it was Officer Creel, one of the more aggressive guards. His boots clicked heavily against the metal floor as he approached, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Aliya slowed her pace, her breath steady, and glanced at him through the corner of her eye. "You've been working out a little too hard, Zaire." Creel's voice was low, rough, with a hint of a threat lingering in his words. "Are you trying to escape or something?" Aliya didn't stop. She kept her pace even as the tension between them grew. Her mind raced as she processed the situation. Creel was one of the more ruthless guards, known for his brutality when dealing with prisoners who were too disobedient. But she had to maintain control. She had no choice. "If I wanted to escape, I wouldn't waste my time on a treadmill," she replied, her voice calm, almost amused. She could feel his eyes boring into the side of her face, waiting for any sign of weakness. But Aliya remained focused, her posture perfect, her movements deliberate. Creel stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "Don't get too comfortable," he said, his voice laced with a warning. "This place is meant to break you." Aliya finally slowed to a stop, stepping off the treadmill with ease. She turned to face him, her eyes locking onto his with unblinking intensity. "You don't have the power to break me, Creel," she said quietly. "Not now, not ever." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Creel studied her, his jaw tightening as if trying to decide whether to push her further. Aliya didn't flinch, didn't back down. She knew she had to stay calm. If she lost control now, everything would unravel. After a long beat, Creel finally scoffed and turned away. "We'll see about that," he muttered, and walked off, leaving Aliya alone with the ever-present buzz of the prison's security systems. As the days passed, the atmosphere inside Zeta 56 grew more charged. The other prisoners began to notice the tension building between Aliya and the guards. Some began to approach her, cautiously, testing her for weaknesses. A few even tried to provoke her, but Aliya didn't take the bait. She could feel the eyes of the inmates on her, and she knew that her every move was being scrutinized. She had to keep them on her side, make them believe she was just another prisoner, trying to survive. But the truth was, she wasn't just trying to survive. She was trying to get closer to Zoran, to uncover the secrets that lay within the walls of this high-security prison. But as the tension continued to build, Aliya's control began to slip. She could feel the pressure mounting from every side. The guards were getting more aggressive, more suspicious of her every move. They had begun to question her, to test her resolve. But it wasn't just the guards. Her interactions with Zoran were becoming more difficult as well. The more she tried to gain his trust, the more he pulled away, as if he were hiding something from her. She couldn't shake the feeling that Zoran knew more than he was letting on, that he was playing his own game. One evening, after a tense encounter with a few other prisoners in the mess hall, Aliya made her way back to her cell. She was lost in thought when Evan suddenly appeared in the hallway. His eyes were wide and his face was etched with concern. "Aliya," Evan called softly, stepping closer. "We need to talk." She stopped, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the hallway. The guards were on the other end, but she could sense the growing scrutiny of the situation. "Now isn't the time," she said, her voice low. "The guards are already watching." "I don't care," Evan shot back, his voice almost pleading. "I've been watching you. Something's wrong. This isn't just about you trying to break out. You're after something bigger. I know you are. And I'm starting to believe it has something to do with Zoran." Aliya's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to connect the dots so quickly. She took a breath, meeting his gaze. "It's more than that, Evan. Zoran's just a piece of the puzzle." Evan's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? What's going on here?" Aliya's eyes darkened, and she leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Syndicate isn't finished with Zoran. They're using him. And if I don't figure out what they're planning, it'll be too late for all of us." Evan stared at her for a long moment, uncertainty written all over his face. "And you want me to help you? You want me to trust you with this?" Aliya paused, her eyes flickering to the guards in the distance, before returning to Evan. "You already know more than you should. It's up to you whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem." Evan stood there, frozen, caught between the duty he had been trained for and the reality of the situation. He had always followed orders, always believed in the system. But Aliya had turned everything upside down. She was right. He knew too much now, and there was no turning back. Meanwhile, Zoran remained a constant enigma. As Aliya spent more time with him, trying to crack the walls of his trust, she began to notice subtle changes in his behavior. He wasn't as distant as he had been in the past, but the moments when he did speak were cryptic. Every conversation seemed to reveal just enough to keep her on edge, but never enough to give her the full picture. The more she pressed him, the more he pulled back. There was always an air of secrecy around him. During one of their more tense meetings, Aliya confronted Zoran directly. "You're hiding something from me," she said, her voice low and steady. "You think I can't see it, but I can. What aren't you telling me?" Zoran's eyes flicked to her, the faintest hint of amusement playing at the corner of his mouth. "You think you're the only one who knows how to play this game, Aliya? I've been doing this long before you ever set foot in here." Aliya stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "If you want to play games, fine. But know this, Zoran. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to end this. You and your syndicate." Zoran's expression faltered, and for a brief moment, she saw something vulnerable in his eyes, an emotion he had long buried. But it disappeared as quickly as it had come. "You think you can stop them?" he said, his voice cold once more. You don't even know what they're planning. You don't know the half of it. Aliya's stomach twisted. The uncertainty in his voice was unsettling. There was something much bigger at play, and she was beginning to realize that the truth about Zeta 56 and the Syndicate was darker than she could have imagined. As she turned away from Zoran's cell, the weight of the situation bore down on her. She had to make a choice: continue digging deeper, risking everything, or pull back and confront the forces she didn't fully understand. As the days wore on, the prison's tension reached its breaking point. The guards were on edge, the prisoners were restless, and Evan found himself caught in the crossfire. Aliya had pushed him to a point where he had no choice but to decide. Would he stand by her, or would he pull back and protect himself? The stakes were higher than ever, and every decision they made would lead them closer to the truth, or to their own destruction. Aliya stood motionless in front of the cracked mirror in her cell, the dim light casting long shadows across her face. Her reflection seemed foreign, even to her own eyes. She was no longer the same person she had been when she arrived at Zeta 56, no longer just a soldier of Terra, a member of a mission she had fully understood. Over the past weeks, her increasing strength, the way she could overpower even the toughest of prisoners with ease, had made her question everything she had known about herself. It wasn't just her combat skills. Something deeper, something unknown was pulsing within her. As she stared at her reflection, it was as if her body was betraying her, revealing power she didn't even recognize. She knew she had been different since she entered Zeta 56, but now, as the days passed and her strength seemed to grow, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. Something had been hidden from her. She turned away from the mirror and paced the small cell. She had no time to dwell on it, no time to confront the storm inside her. But the truth kept calling to her, gnawing at her thoughts. What was happening to her? Why was she getting stronger, and what did it mean? She clenched her fists and tried to push the thoughts aside, but they wouldn't leave. The mission had to come first, uncovering the secrets of the Syndicate, gaining Zoran's trust, extracting the vital information to bring down their criminal empire. But now she was beginning to wonder if the power surging through her would help or hinder that mission. The truth about herself, about what she had been created to be, could change everything, if she could even figure out what it was. She had always been taught that strength was something to be earned, something that came from skill and training. But this was different. This was raw, unnatural, and unfamiliar. It was as though the power had been there all along, lying dormant, waiting for something to trigger it. She couldn't explain it, and worse, she couldn't remember why it was happening. Her memories were fractured, like pieces of a puzzle scattered just out of reach. It was as if someone had taken her past and hidden it from her history, her origins, and the true nature of the mission she had been sent on. Every time she tried to dig deeper, every time she sought out the truth, the memories slipped further away, leaving her with only more questions. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. She wasn't just a soldier. She wasn't just here to infiltrate a prison and extract information from Zoran. She was part of something bigger, something that went beyond her understanding of the world. What if her strength, the unnatural force building inside her, was tied to something much darker? What if she was being manipulated, used as a tool without even knowing it? The thought made her freeze. Could she even trust herself? She glanced around the cell again, as if the walls might have the answers she was seeking, but they remained silent. She had been so focused on the task at hand, on completing the mission, that she had never considered the possibility that she wasn't just being watched. She was being shaped. She was a weapon, but who had forged her, and why? Evan's voice broke through her thoughts, a knock on the door, followed by his unmistakable tone. "Aliya," he called softly. She turned sharply, her heart skipping a beat. He had been so observant lately, and she knew that his suspicions were growing. She didn't need him getting too close to the truth. Not yet. Not until she had answers of her own. She opened the door and greeted him with a forced calm. "What is it?" Evan's face was lined with concern, his eyes searching hers as if trying to figure out what she was hiding. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice hesitant, "about everything. About you. I don't think you're telling me the whole truth. Aliya kept her expression neutral, but inside her stomach twisted. She couldn't afford to lose him now, not when everything was starting to unravel. What do you mean? I've been watching you, he said, his gaze unwavering. You're not like the other prisoners. You're not just here to do your time. There's something about you, something you're not telling me. Aliya let out a slow breath, trying to keep her composure. She had anticipated this moment, but it still felt like the ground beneath her was shifting. She had known from the start that Evan would figure it out eventually. He was smart, more perceptive than she had originally given him credit for. But that didn't change the fact that she couldn't afford to expose everything, not yet. Not when she didn't even fully understand it herself. Evan, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here for something bigger than you can imagine. I'm here to stop the Syndicate, and if you're not careful, you'll end up being part of their plan too. He looked at her for a long time, the weight of her words sinking in. Then his expression softened, though the doubt in his eyes remained. I don't know if I can trust you anymore. I want to, but everything you've said, everything I've seen, it doesn't add up. Aliya felt a pang of frustration, but she knew she couldn't blame him. The truth was, she didn't have all the answers herself. I'm not asking you to trust me, she said quietly. I'm asking you to help me. We both know what's at stake. Evan didn't respond right away. Instead, he glanced at the floor, his fists clenched at his sides. I can't just ignore what I've seen. Something's not right here, and I need to know what it is. If I'm going to help you, I need the truth. Aliya nodded slowly. The truth? It's complicated, Evan. There's more to me than I've been allowed to remember. I don't even know all of it myself. But I'll tell you this. I'm not your enemy. I'm trying to stop something far worse. Evan's eyes flickered with doubt, but he didn't say anything. He simply nodded, the tension between them hanging in the air. Aliya could feel the distance between them widening, but she also knew that she couldn't afford to lose him. Not now. Meanwhile, Zoran's role in this growing puzzle was becoming more and more crucial. Aliya's interactions with him had shifted over time. He was no longer the distant, aloof figure he had been when she first arrived. He had started revealing pieces of the Syndicate's plan, dropping cryptic clues that made her realize just how deep this conspiracy went. Every conversation with him felt like she was peeling back another layer of the truth, but each layer revealed more complexity, more danger. Zoran wasn't just a prisoner, he was a key player, and Aliya had to tread carefully. In one of their more intense conversations, Zoran looked at her with a hint of something, almost regret. You're digging into something you can't handle, Aliya, he warned, his voice low. There are things here that should never be uncovered. What are you hiding, Zoran? Aliya demanded, her eyes narrowing. What is the Syndicate really planning? Zoran chuckled softly, but there was no humor in it. You're too curious for your own good. There are things even I don't understand yet. But when it all comes out, you'll see why they've been using you. Aliya's heart raced, her fist clenched. What do you mean? What have they done to me? Zoran leaned forward slightly, his eyes darkening. Everything you think you know is a lie. They've been controlling you, just like they've been controlling me. The words hit her like a physical blow. She stumbled back, her breath coming in short gasps. The pieces were falling into place, but it wasn't the picture she had hoped for. What are you talking about? She whispered. Zoran's expression softened, but only slightly. You're not just a soldier, Aliya. You're part of something much bigger, something you can't escape, even if you try. But it's not too late. There's still time to stop it, but only if you act fast. Aliya stood frozen, her mind spinning. Everything she thought she knew about her mission, about herself, was crumbling. But there was no time to dwell on it. The Syndicate was moving, and if she didn't act soon, everything she'd fought for would be lost. Evan's doubts, Zoran's cryptic warnings, and the truth about her own past were converging into a storm she couldn't control. But one thing was clear. She had to find a way to stop the Syndicate before it was too late, no matter the cost. Zeta 56 had never been a place of peace, but now the tension was palpable, thick, pressing, suffocating. The days of subtle observation were over. The Syndicate had begun to act. Their presence felt in every corner of the prison. They were no longer hiding in the shadows, whispering in the dark. No, they were making their moves, forcing Aliya and Evan into the spotlight. The elaborate system of control they had once so carefully constructed now seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. Aliya felt it first, a shift in the atmosphere, the subtle hints of something bigger at play. But nothing could prepare her for the full force of the storm that was about to hit. Every decision, every step she had taken, had brought her closer to this moment. But now, standing at the crossroads of survival and chaos, she couldn't afford any mistakes. The first sign came late one evening, when the alarms began blaring throughout the prison. Aliya's heart skipped a beat as the flashing lights bathed the concrete walls in crimson. The walls vibrated with the sound of a distant explosion, and the usual hum of the facility's systems faltered. She wasn't surprised. She had known the Syndicate wouldn't wait forever, but the suddenness of it still caught her off guard. Evan was already in motion, his face grim as he rushed into her cell. "They've made their move," he said, his voice low and tense. "We don't have much time." Aliya glanced at the small window in her cell, the dark sky beyond the only thing visible. "What are they doing?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline that coursed through her veins. She knew the Syndicate would strike at some point, but she hadn't expected it to be so soon, nor with such force. "We're under attack," Evan explained, his gaze flicking to the security monitors. "They've breached the outer perimeter. We're trapped in here. The control room is compromised. They're using the chaos to push for something bigger." Aliya's mind was racing. She had anticipated a direct assault at some point, but this was different. The Syndicate was moving quickly, targeting Zeta 56's critical systems, creating distractions at every turn. She had to act fast. "We need to stop them. We can't let them get to Zoran." Evan looked at her, his eyes clouded with doubt. "We're not ready for this. They've planned this down to the smallest detail. We don't even know what they want yet." "I know," Aliya said, her voice cold as she stepped toward the door. "But we don't have a choice. If we don't take control now, we'll lose everything." They moved quickly through the hallways, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the distant cries of prisoners and the chaos echoing from all directions. Aliya was scanning the surroundings, every instinct honed to the sharpest edge, ready for anything. This wasn't just an escape plan. This was war. The Syndicate wasn't here to negotiate. They were here to take control. And Aliya knew that if she didn't act decisively, she would be buried under the weight of the situation. As they passed through the security checkpoints, Aliya could feel the subtle changes in the guards' behavior. They were tense, on edge, their eyes darting nervously to the shadows, their movements erratic as they struggled to maintain control. But it was clear they were losing the battle. The Syndicate's presence was already felt inside the prison, manipulating the guards and prisoners alike. It was a masterstroke of strategy: create chaos, break down the walls of security, and use fear as a weapon. Aliya knew the guards would be easy targets for manipulation. The Syndicate had used similar tactics before, undermining their authority, spreading distrust, and weakening their resolve. But it wasn't just the guards she had to worry about. The prisoners were no different. Some were already rallying, using the chaos to their advantage, attempting to seize power in the midst of the confusion. Aliya could see the flicker of fear in their eyes, the desperation as they realized they might be caught in a war they couldn't control. "Focus," Aliya whispered to Evan as they ducked into a narrow corridor. "We need to find the control room and lock down the systems. They're using the chaos to take control of the security feed. We can't let them." Evan nodded, his face set in determination, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. He wasn't sure they could win this battle. Neither was she, but she couldn't afford to show weakness. They moved quickly, making their way deeper into the heart of the prison. Meanwhile, the chaos outside was growing. The Syndicate's plan was coming into focus. Aliya could feel the growing weight of the pressure on her shoulders, the realization that the world she had known was slipping away. She wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting to stop a force more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. As they reached the central control room, Aliya's heart pounded in her chest. The security systems had been compromised, and the monitors were flashing erratically, the screens flickering with static. She moved to the console, her fingers flying across the keys. But the system fought back, layers of encryption appearing faster than she could bypass them. "We don't have much time," Evan said, his voice tight as he kept watch at the door. "The prisoners are getting restless. If we don't get the system back online, we'll lose everything." Aliya's breath quickened, but her hands remained steady. She had faced worse. She had broken through tougher defenses, but this was different. This was the Syndicate, an organization that had spent years perfecting its tactics, a criminal empire that was playing its pieces in a way she had never anticipated. "Hold on," she muttered, her eyes scanning the rapidly changing data on the screen. "I'm almost there." Suddenly, the door behind them slammed open, and a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Zoran. His face was shadowed, his eyes gleaming with something dark and dangerous. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said, his voice low and filled with warning. Aliya turned to face him, her heart skipping a beat. "What are you doing here?" Zoran stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the terminal. "You're trying to stop them, but you don't even know what they're after. You don't know what you're really up against." Aliya's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? I thought you were on our side." Zoran chuckled darkly. "There's no our side in this game, Aliya. The Syndicate has already won. You're just a pawn, a tool they've been using for years. You really think they haven't been watching you too?" Aliya's pulse quickened as she processed his words. What was he saying? Had everything she had been doing been part of their plan all along? Was she just a pawn in their game? Evan stepped forward, his hand on his weapon, his voice harsh. "You've been playing us all along, haven't you?" Zoran didn't flinch. "I don't need to play you. You were already playing yourself. I never wanted to be part of this. But now it's too late. The Syndicate is coming for everything." The air in Zeta 56 had shifted. What began as a simple mission to extract information from Zoran had evolved into something much larger. Aliya stood at the edge of an abyss, her hands steady, but her heart racing. The truth was becoming clearer with every moment. The Syndicate's reach was far beyond Zeta 56. Their manipulation had extended across the galaxy, and the prison had been nothing more than the first stage of a much darker plan. Aliya's mind reeled as the pieces fell into place. The Syndicate wasn't just targeting this prison, they were setting the stage for a galactic upheaval, using Zeta 56 as a test ground for their insidious plan to infiltrate and control key systems across the universe. The prison, with its seemingly impenetrable security, had been a perfect place to test their methods, to gauge their power. And now the operation was on the verge of a full-scale invasion. Aliya's thoughts were interrupted by Evan, who stood beside her, his eyes scanning the flashing data on the screen. The severity of the situation was beginning to sink in. "We're not just stopping a prison break anymore, are we?" he said, his voice low. "This is bigger than Zeta 56. They're moving to take control of the galaxy." Aliya nodded, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "We've been playing into their hands from the start. The Syndicate's infiltration runs deeper than we realized." She paused, letting the realization settle. "But I'll be damned if I'm their pawn." As Aliya continued to navigate through the prison's failing systems, she discovered the full scope of the Syndicate's operation. The encrypted files revealed connections between the prison and high-ranking officials in key military and political sectors. Zeta 56 wasn't just a prison, it was a front for a larger conspiracy. The Syndicate had already infiltrated vital positions across the galaxy, using their control of Zeta 56 to test their ability to destabilize entire systems without detection. It was a plan years in the making, and the execution was flawless. But just as the gravity of the situation hit her, the door to the control room slammed open. Zoran walked in, his face unreadable. "You're in over your head, Aliya," he said, his voice colder than she had ever heard it. "They've been using you. Everything you've done has been part of their strategy." Aliya's chest tightened. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it from him made it real. "What do you mean? I've been fighting to stop them." "You think you're in control of this, but you're not," Zoran said, his eyes dark with understanding. "You've been manipulated from the start. The Syndicate's whole plan has been built around you, Aliya. They knew you would come here. They knew you'd break into their systems, and they counted on it. Aliya's mind spun, the weight of his words sinking in. "I'm not part of their plan," she spat, her voice shaking with anger. "I'm here to stop them." Zoran's expression softened, but only slightly. "The Syndicate is bigger than you realize. They've already planted the seeds. What you're doing now, it's not enough to stop them. You'll need more than just yourself." Aliya felt the tension between them thickening, but she didn't have time for another philosophical debate. "I'm not here for advice. I'm here for answers. How do we stop them?" Zoran stood silent for a moment before finally speaking. "If you want to stop them, you have to understand what they're really after. The power they have, it's not just in Zeta 56. They're manipulating entire fleets, entire governments. They're waiting for the right moment to strike." Aliya's heart raced. She already knew the Syndicate had infiltrated key positions, but hearing Zoran confirm it only deepened the sense of urgency. "Then we need to act. We can't waste any more time." Zoran's eyes flickered with something Aliya couldn't quite place. "There's no easy way out of this. The Syndicate's plan is already in motion, and they're not going to let you stop them." Aliya clenched her fists. "Then we'll make sure they don't have a choice." With Zoran's reluctant assistance, Aliya and Evan moved swiftly, fighting against the clock. The prison had become a battlefield. The sound of explosions and gunfire echoed down the hallways as the Syndicate's forces pushed forward. Aliya and Evan weren't just trying to regain control of Zeta 56. They were fighting to prevent a galactic takeover. They had only one chance. Aliya and Evan worked together seamlessly, but it was clear that the stakes were higher than ever. With every move they made, the Syndicate seemed to counter it, anticipating their every step. The control room was now a battleground, with the Syndicate's agents closing in from all sides. As the final phase of their plan took shape, Aliya and Evan knew they couldn't afford any mistakes. Zoran's presence was unsettling. At times he seemed like an ally, offering guidance and sharing crucial information. At other moments, he seemed to be playing his own game, manipulating the situation for his own ends. Aliya couldn't afford to trust him fully. Not yet. The stakes were too high, and every decision could be their last. The tension between Aliya and Evan also reached its peak. They had been through so much together, but now, as the walls of the prison seemed to close in on them, the cracks in their relationship began to show. The weight of their mission was beginning to take its toll. Could they still rely on each other, or would the growing uncertainty push them apart? "Do you trust him?" Evan asked quietly, his voice filled with doubt. Aliya glanced at Zoran, who was monitoring the security feeds, his face unreadable. "I don't trust him," she said firmly, "but we don't have a choice. We need his help to stop the Syndicate." Evan didn't respond, but the tension between them was palpable. They were in this together, but how much longer could they stay united when everything around them was crumbling? As the final confrontation loomed, Aliya knew the outcome wasn't certain. They had uncovered the Syndicate's plan, but stopping it seemed almost impossible. The prison had become a war zone, and their every move was being watched. The stakes couldn't be higher. Zoran's true role in all of this remained unclear. Was he a willing ally, or was he playing his own game to further his own goals? Could he truly help Aliya, or was he just another tool in the Syndicate's hand? She couldn't trust him completely, but she had no other choice but to move forward. With the walls closing in and the Syndicate's plans unraveling before her, Aliya made her decision. She would fight. She would fight with everything she had, no matter the cost. This was no longer just about stopping the Syndicate. It was about reclaiming her identity, her purpose. The future of the galaxy depended on it. Aliya and Evan stood at the edge of the unknown. The air was thick with tension as they prepared to execute their final plan to stop the Syndicate's galactic takeover. The moment they had been working toward for weeks had finally arrived. They knew this would be their last chance to prevent disaster, but it wasn't going to be easy. The Syndicate had already infiltrated critical systems across the galaxy, and Zeta 56 had become a ticking time bomb. Everything hinged on their ability to infiltrate the heart of the Syndicate's operations within the prison and neutralize the threats before it was too late. Aliya looked over at Evan, his expression focused but filled with the uncertainty of what was to come. "We can't afford to fail," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "We have to move quickly, or it's all over." Evan nodded, his jaw tight. We do this right, we stop them. But if we mess up, we might just set the whole galaxy on fire. They moved in unison, navigating the dark hallways of Zeta 56, every step deliberate, every decision carefully considered. They had come so far, but the stakes were higher than ever. The Syndicate had been playing the long game, but Aliya and Evan had one last chance to disrupt their plan. The system they had to infiltrate was heavily guarded, with layers of security built to withstand even the most skilled operatives. But Aliya knew their only chance was to strike fast and strike hard. As they reached the central control room, they encountered their first hurdle. The door was locked down, and the usual security protocols had been bypassed. Aliya's eyes narrowed in frustration. They knew we'd come for this. We're too late. Evan stepped forward, analyzing the system with a sharp gaze. We can still break through. We just need to be faster. But before they could make a move, the door slid open with a soft hiss, and Zoran appeared in the doorway, his face expressionless. "I've been expecting you," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. Aliya tensed, every instinct telling her to be cautious. "We're not here for games, Zoran. We need your help." Zoran didn't reply immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to the control panel and started typing with surprising ease. "You think you've been playing catch-up," he said, his voice tinged with something almost sarcastic. "The Syndicate's plan is already in motion. But if you want to stop them, you need to understand the bigger picture." Aliya's mind raced. She knew the Syndicate was planning something massive, but the details were still unclear. "What do you mean? What's the bigger picture?" Zoran's eyes flicked toward her, a shadow passing across his face. Zeta 56 wasn't just a prison, it was a test, a prototype for what the Syndicate wants to do across the galaxy. They've infiltrated everything. Military, political, you name it. They've been building their empire right under your nose. Aliya's heart sank. She had suspected as much, but hearing Zoran confirm it hit harder than expected. The prison had been just the beginning, a small piece of the puzzle. The Syndicate's plan extended far beyond Zeta 56. It was a galactic takeover, and they were closer to succeeding than she had feared. "You knew about this?" Aliya asked, her voice rising. "You've been playing us the whole time." Zoran didn't flinch. "I didn't have a choice. I've been part of their operation for years. But now," he hesitated, his gaze shifting toward the terminal. "Now you need to make a decision. The Syndicate won't stop just because you want to. They've already won." Aliya clenched her fists, frustration boiling within her. "Not if I can stop them." Zoran's expression softened, but only slightly. "You can try, but the deeper you dig, the more dangerous it gets. This isn't just about saving this prison anymore. It's about saving the galaxy." Aliya stood frozen, absorbing his words. There was no turning back now. The truth was out. Zoran had been both a tool and a prisoner in this deadly game. But could she rely on him? Could she trust him to help? Or was he still playing his own game? "Give me everything," she said, her voice firm. "All of it, every last piece." Zoran hesitated but finally nodded, handing over a hidden file from the terminal. As Aliya opened it, the full extent of the Syndicate's reach was revealed. They had not only infiltrated key systems, they had taken control of entire fleets, manipulated galactic trade routes, and placed operatives in high-ranking positions across the universe. The prison, the warships, the resources, all of it was part of a much larger operation. Zeta 56 had been a testing ground, and now the real war was about to begin. Aliya's eyes scanned the files in disbelief. The Syndicate's invasion wasn't just a military campaign. It was a covert operation designed to destabilize entire governments. And the prison had been the center of it all. Evan stepped up, his face pale as he processed the gravity of what they were facing. This goes beyond Zeta 56. The whole galaxy is at risk." Aliya nodded, the weight of the task before her sinking in. "We have to stop them. This prison is just the beginning. If we don't stop this now, there's nothing left to save." The final push was imminent. The walls around them trembled as explosions reverberated through the prison, signaling the Syndicate's full assault. Aliya and Evan had to make their move, but time was running out. As the control systems flickered and alarms blared, They knew they had one last chance to stop the Syndicate. Zoran, despite his past betrayals, seemed to recognize the severity of the situation. "The Syndicate won't let you win," he warned, his voice grim. "But if you want to try, you'll need to use everything at your disposal." The tension between Aliya and Zoran was palpable, but the clock was ticking. She couldn't afford to waste time questioning his motives now. They had no choice but to move forward. As they rushed to the central command hub, their path was clear. The final confrontation was upon them. Would they succeed in stopping the Syndicate's plan, or would they fall to the machine that had already begun to grind the galaxy into chaos? With every step, Aliya's resolve hardened. She and Evan had come this far, and they weren't backing down now. The war was far from over, but it would end on their terms. The question that lingered in the air, unspoken but ever present, was simple. Could they trust Zoran? Would he help them, or would he betray them at the final moment? Only time would tell, but there was no turning back now. The future of the galaxy depended on the choices they made in the coming moments. The walls of Zeta 56, once an impenetrable fortress designed to house the most dangerous criminals in the galaxy, began to tremble. The humming sound of its advanced security systems sputtered and died, and for a brief moment, everything was eerily silent. Aliya stood frozen in the control room, eyes glued to the flashing red screens, her fingers poised above the console. The prison, once a symbol of absolute control, was now crumbling beneath their feet, the structure itself slowly but surely falling apart. It was as if the very foundation of the Syndicate's empire was beginning to collapse, unable to hold the weight of its own dark secrets any longer. "Is this it?" Evan asked, his voice barely audible over the low groan of the walls. His expression was a mix of disbelief and concern. "Is this the end of Zeta 56? Aliya didn't respond immediately. Her eyes narrowed as she quickly scanned the control room, her mind racing to connect the dots. The explosions that rocked the prison earlier had caused significant damage to the infrastructure. But this felt different. The systematic failure wasn't a result of external attacks alone. It seemed as though something within the prison was actively sabotaging the security systems. It was a coordinated assault, one that had been planned long before they had arrived. "We're not done yet," Aliya said finally, her voice cold with determination. "Syndicate's not just trying to regain control, they're covering their tracks." Evan's brows furrowed as he looked at her, confused. "Covering their tracks? What do you mean?" Aliya turned to face him, her eyes filled with a sense of urgency. "Syndicate's been running this prison for years, Evan. But it's not just a prison, it's a key part of their larger operation. They've been hiding something here, something that could change everything." As if on cue, a violent tremor shook the ground beneath them. Aliya clenched her fists, frustration bubbling up within her. This is their last-ditch effort. They're destroying everything, every record, every piece of evidence. They're making sure no one can expose their crimes. Evan's face went pale as the realization hit him. So this prison, all of it, was never just about keeping criminals locked up. It was about something much bigger. Aliya nodded grimly, her mind racing. Exactly. This prison wasn't just for holding the galaxy's worst criminals. It was a strategic hub for Syndicate's operations. The people they've been keeping here, they're not just any criminals. They're part of a much larger network, one that's been silently controlling entire sectors of the galaxy. Syndicate has been using Zeta 56 to manipulate, exploit, and run covert operations for years, and now they're going to wipe it all out before anyone can learn the truth. Evan took a deep breath, his mind struggling to process the scale of what Aliya was saying. "Then, what do we do now? We've been fighting them this whole time, but if they're just covering up their tracks, then what's the point? How do we stop them?" Aliya looked over at him, her expression hardening. "We stop them from wiping the evidence. We get the data before it's gone." Without another word, Aliya turned back to the console, her hands moving swiftly across the keys, trying to re-establish a connection to the prison's mainframe. But the screen was flickering in and out, the system increasingly unstable as the prison's defenses continued to fail. "They've locked us out," Aliya muttered under her breath. "But if we can just get into the secure files, the data we need is still there." Evan looked over her shoulder at the scrambling code, his anxiety growing. How much time do we have? Aliya glanced at the countdown timer on the screen, the seconds ticking down with frightening speed. Not much. The main systems are going down. But if we don't act fast, all the data we need will be erased. The realization hit them both at once. Everything they had been fighting for, their entire mission to expose the Syndicate's corruption, to uncover the conspiracy, was now in jeopardy. If they didn't act quickly, they would lose everything. The evidence that could bring the Syndicate down, the hidden operations spanning the galaxy, would be gone. And with it, the galaxy would continue to live in the Syndicate's stranglehold, unaware of the truth that had been buried beneath Zeta 56 for so long. "We need to act fast," Aliya said, her voice cold with determination. "We can't let them get away with this." Evan nodded, his eyes filled with resolve. "Let's do it. What's the plan?" Aliya turned to face him, her mind already working out the logistics of their next move. "We need to access the central core of the prison's data systems. If we can override the lockouts and pull the files, we can expose everything. The Syndicate's full operation, their connections across the galaxy. It's the only way to stop them." The urgency in Aliya's voice made it clear there was no room for hesitation. They had come this far, and the stakes had never been higher. With the walls of the prison literally falling apart around them, they couldn't afford to waste a second. The clock was ticking, and the Syndicate's attempt to erase their tracks was in full swing. Evan turned to look at the door, his eyes scanning the hallway outside. "We need to move. The Syndicate will know we're on to them soon enough. Once they realize we've breached the security systems, they'll come for us." Aliya's gaze flicked to the flickering monitors one last time before she straightened up, locking eyes with him. "Let's get the data, then get out. We'll expose them, no matter the cost." The sounds of distant gunfire echoed through the corridors of Zeta 56. Prisoners had begun their revolt, and the battle for control had escalated. As Aliya and Evan made their way through the crumbling prison, they knew that the Syndicate's last-ditch effort to destroy the evidence wasn't just a simple cover-up, it was a fight for survival. They were fighting for the truth, for the galaxy, and for the future. If they didn't succeed, everything would be lost. But in the depths of Zeta 56, as the walls buckled under the strain of the chaos, Aliya couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight was just beginning. They were about to uncover something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. The Syndicate's web of lies was deep, and they were about to pull on the thread that could unravel everything. But first, they needed to survive the collapse of Zeta 56, and that was no small feat. The chaos of the prison's collapse had subsided somewhat, but the tension remained thick in the air. Zoran, despite the swirling uncertainty of Zeta 56's implosion, had a singular goal in mind: escape. He had spent too long being manipulated, controlled by the Syndicate, too long playing a part in their dirty schemes. He had aided Aliya and Evan in their fight against the Syndicate, but the realization was now sinking in that his role in this battle had always been part of a bigger plan. He wasn't fighting to save the galaxy. He was fighting to protect the interests of those who had used him from the beginning. Zoran had already begun to make his way through the crumbling hallways of Zeta 56, his mind racing with the weight of his actions. For years, he had been a willing participant in the Syndicate's covert operations, thinking he was a valued member of their ranks. But now, standing in the midst of the broken facility, the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He had been nothing more than a tool in their grand scheme, a puppet manipulated into carrying out their plans without ever knowing the full extent of what was really happening. As he walked through the wreckage, Zoran made his way to the docking bay, hoping to find a way out. The sound of distant explosions still echoed in the corridors, the distant thrum of chaos that seemed to permeate every corner of the prison. He reached the docking bay, a part of the facility that had always felt like an exit, a promise of freedom, but what he found instead shattered him. The docking area was empty. There were no ships, no vessels ready to take him away from this nightmare. For a moment, Zoran stood frozen, staring at the empty hangars. His heart pounded in his chest as the horrifying truth began to unfold. The Syndicate had never planned on rescuing him. They had abandoned him here, left to rot in the very prison he had helped them infiltrate. The realization crushed him. Zoran's breath became shallow as the truth hit him with brutal clarity. The Syndicate had never seen him as anything more than a means to an end. He wasn't a valuable asset. He wasn't someone they wanted to protect. He was just a tool they had used to gain access to Zeta 56, a pawn in their intricate web of corruption. The Syndicate had used his position to gather critical information from the galaxy's most dangerous criminals, information that had been passed through Zeta 56 for years. His job had always been to ensure that those criminals remained hidden, to keep the Syndicate's dealings secret. Feeling the weight of this betrayal like a heavy stone on his chest, Zoran finally allowed himself a moment to process the enormity of his situation. He had been a fool. He had thought that by helping the Syndicate, he was securing his place in their organization. But they had used him, and now they had discarded him, left to face the fallout of their plan alone. "This is it," Zoran muttered to himself, staring at the empty docking bays. "They're gone. I'm nothing to them." The deep sense of betrayal churned within him. The Syndicate had no intention of rescuing him from Zeta 56. They had planned for him to be a convenient tool, and once his usefulness had ended, they had cast him aside. He was expendable. As he stood there contemplating his next move, Zoran's thoughts shifted toward Aliya and Evan. Despite his doubts and the complexity of his feelings towards them, he realized something that made the decision clear. He had to stop the Syndicate, not just for the galaxy, but for himself. His entire existence up until this point had been under their thumb, and now it was time to break free. Without hesitation, Zoran turned and made his way back toward the prison's central hub. He knew what he had to do. The Syndicate's plan was far more extensive than he had ever realized. But now he could act, no longer a pawn, but a man determined to fight back. It wasn't too late. He still had a chance to make things right. Back in the prison's heart, Aliya and Evan had just started to regroup, preparing for what they thought was their final push against the Syndicate. But they weren't prepared for what Zoran had to say. When he arrived, there was no arrogance in his step, no self-assuredness. The man who had once appeared so sure of his role in the Syndicate's hierarchy now seemed a shadow of himself, the weight of betrayal heavy in his eyes. "I've been a fool," Zoran said, his voice almost a whisper as he stood in front of Aliya and Evan. "I've been used, just like the rest of the galaxy." Aliya eyed him warily, her mind racing. "What do you mean? We're fighting to stop the Syndicate's plans. You've been helping us." Zoran's gaze flicked between Aliya and Evan, his expression haunted. "You don't understand. I was their tool, a puppet. They didn't want me to fight with you. I was just a way for them to infiltrate Zeta 56, a way for them to manipulate the system. They've been using me for years." Evan stepped forward, his expression skeptical. "So now you want to help us, after everything you've done?" Zoran nodded, his face grim. "I can't undo what I've done, but I can help you stop them. They abandoned me here, but I'm not going to let them destroy everything. I have the data, the information that could end them." Aliya studied him carefully, her mind racing. Zoran had always been a mystery, but there was no time to question his motives now. If he was telling the truth, he could be the key to bringing the Syndicate down once and for all. "How can we trust you?" Zoran's face softened, a tinge of regret in his eyes. "You don't have to trust me. You just have to trust the information. I've already seen what they're capable of. If we don't act now, it's all over." Aliya paused for a moment, considering his words. The room around them felt as though it were closing in, the weight of their decisions pressing down on them. But despite the doubts swirling in her mind, one thing was clear. They needed him. Zoran might have been their enemy once, but now he was their ally. "We don't have time to waste," Aliya said firmly, her voice filled with resolve. "Let's end this." Zoran stood in front of the makeshift terminal they had set up in a hidden corner of Zeta 56, his fingers hovering above the keys. The weight of the moment was suffocating. For years he had been complicit in the Syndicate's plans, feeding them information, securing their operations, and being the pawn they used to infiltrate key systems. But now, standing alongside Aliya and Evan, the truth was clear. The Syndicate's ambitions stretched far beyond the confines of Zeta 56. It was time to expose them, to take them down once and for all. Aliya was by his side, her sharp gaze scanning the data as it loaded onto the terminal. Evan paced nearby, his eyes darting nervously to the door, constantly aware of the dangers lurking in the shadows. The tension in the room was palpable. They were running out of time, and the Syndicate was watching. Every moment they spent in this room could be their last, but they had no choice. This was the only way to stop the Syndicate's plan from unfolding. "We don't have much time," Aliya said, her voice low and urgent. "We need to send this data to the Galactic Security Council. They're our only hope for putting an end to this." Zoran nodded grimly, his face lined with the weight of his betrayal. "I know," he replied. "This is the only way. If we don't act now, everything we've done will be for nothing." The data they were preparing to send was more than just a collection of encrypted files. It was the key to unraveling the Syndicate's entire operation. Inside the files were details about their plans to infiltrate the most powerful governments in the galaxy, their secret dealings with criminal organizations, and their methods for controlling key military forces. There were also records of their plans to destabilize entire sectors and expand their influence by using Zeta 56 as a launchpad. It was enough to bring the Syndicate to its knees if the Galactic Security Council could act on it in time. Zoran's fingers flew over the keys, inputting the final commands to transmit the data. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had betrayed everything he once stood for by helping the Syndicate, but now in this moment, he had a chance to make it right. The truth he was about to reveal would change the course of the galaxy. If the Syndicate was stopped, it wouldn't just be his redemption, it would be a victory for everyone who had suffered under their rule. "There," Zoran said, his voice tight with emotion. "It's done. The data is on its way to the council." Aliya watched as the transmission sent, the digital progress bar slowly moving across the screen. It felt like the longest few seconds of her life. Her heart was in her throat, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that they were being set up for a final betrayal. "We did it," Aliya said quietly, but the words felt hollow. They weren't out of danger yet. The Syndicate still had eyes everywhere, and they wouldn't give up easily. Evan stepped closer to the terminal, his eyes still scanning the doorway. "It's too soon to celebrate. The Syndicate is going to come after us. They'll do everything they can to stop this." Zoran stood up straight, his face grim but determined. "They've already tried. This time, we're one step ahead. The data is out there. It's in the hands of the most powerful authorities in the galaxy now." Aliya's voice was steady, though her eyes betrayed the deep anxiety she felt. "And we'll make sure they act on it. The Council has to take this seriously. The Syndicate is a threat to the entire galaxy. If we don't expose them now, they'll continue to grow stronger." Zoran nodded, his jaw tight. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about everyone who suffered under their control. It's about ending the Syndicate's reign." The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Aliya stiffened, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. Zoran's eyes darted toward the door, his mind calculating their next move. "We don't have much time," he muttered. "The Syndicate's agents will be on us any second." Aliya turned to him, her expression hardening. "We've done what we can. Now we fight." But as they prepared for their next move, the weight of their actions began to settle in. The data they had just transmitted would bring the truth to light, but at what cost? They had no idea what kind of backlash they would face from the Syndicate once the Council received the files. Would it be enough to bring down the Syndicate, or would they strike back with even greater force? Aliya, Zoran, and Evan had no way of knowing what the future held, but they had made their choice. They had exposed the Syndicate. Now it was up to the galaxy to respond. As they moved quickly through the crumbling halls of Zeta 56, the countdown to the next phase of their mission had begun. They couldn't afford to wait around to see if the Council would act. They had to be ready for whatever came next. But there was something more that lingered in the back of Aliya's mind. The battle against the Syndicate had started as a fight for justice, but now it was something more. The truth had been exposed, but how would the galaxy react? Would they stand together to fight this threat, or would they fall under the Syndicate's shadow once again? As the doors to Zeta 56 slammed shut behind them, Aliya and her team prepared for the worst. Their work wasn't over yet, but at least for the first time, they knew they had taken the right step forward. The data was out there. The truth was finally in the open. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Aliya could see a glimmer of hope in the distance. After the destruction of Zeta 56, the Syndicate was certain that both Zoran and Aliya had perished in the collapse. The prison, a key stronghold in their operations, was now in ruins, and they assumed their enemies had been buried beneath the rubble. But in the shadows of the devastation, Aliya and Zoran had managed to survive. Their escape was as calculated as it was dangerous, using the chaos to their advantage. But even in the aftermath, they knew the Syndicate would not let them go easily. Their fight was far from over. Zoran, Aliya, and Evan, having carefully avoided Syndicate pursuit, set their sights on a new mission. They knew that while Zeta 56 was in ruins, the Syndicate had lost only a battle, not the war. They decided to track down one of the Syndicate's hidden operations, a secret meeting on a desolate planet where illicit deals were still being made. This planet, distant and uninhabited, was perfect for the Syndicate's covert dealings, far from the prying eyes of the Galactic Security Council. Their plan was clear: infiltrate, gather information, and disrupt whatever operations they could, forcing the Syndicate to stumble once again. "We have to make sure the Syndicate doesn't regain its foothold," Zoran said as they prepared for their mission. "We can't let them rebuild." Aliya looked out at the barren landscape ahead, knowing the risks. "We've already exposed them, but they're still dangerous. We need to hit them where it hurts." The journey to the desolate planet was tense. The planet's surface, scarred by ancient conflicts, stood as a silent testament to its isolation. The Syndicate had chosen it for a reason. No witnesses, no interference, just space to conduct their transactions. They landed, concealed in the shadow of a decaying fortress. Inside, their next challenge awaited: the Syndicate's remaining leadership in their remaining secret deals. However, what Zoran, Aliya, and Evan didn't expect was that their actions had already caught the attention of the Galactic Security Council. The data they had sent had triggered an immediate response, and the Council had acted swiftly to investigate further. As they infiltrated the meeting location, they didn't know the extent to which the Council was already onto them. Just as Zoran, Aliya, and Evan were about to disrupt the Syndicate's plans, a fleet of galactic security ships dropped out of hyperspace, surrounding the planet and cutting off any escape routes. The operation had been exposed. Within moments, Zoran and Aliya were apprehended. Their attempt to undermine the Syndicate was being interpreted as a violation of galactic law, unauthorized access to government systems, and illegal interference in interstellar relations. "Do you realize what you've done?" a member of the Galactic Security Council asked as they moved to arrest them. "You've invaded our systems, taken matters into your own hands. You could have caused chaos." Zoran's face remained stoic as he faced the consequences of his actions. "I've seen the chaos the Syndicate is capable of. I've witnessed their destruction. If you want to stop them, you need to trust us." Aliya stood beside Zoran, her eyes unwavering. "We didn't break the law for nothing. We exposed the Syndicate. We stopped their plan." The Council deliberated briefly, and while both Zoran and Aliya were officially detained for their actions, there was a shift in how they were treated. Given the magnitude of their contributions in dismantling the Syndicate and providing crucial information to the Council, Zoran's punishment was reduced. He was not executed or imprisoned for life, as might have been expected, but rather his sentence was commuted due to the significant role he had played in dismantling the Syndicate's operations. Meanwhile, Aliya and Evan were both recognized for their brave actions. Their efforts to expose the Syndicate's web of corruption earned them high praise from the Galactic Security Council. As a result, they were granted immunity for their previous illegal actions, with the Council's acknowledgement of their extraordinary role in bringing the Syndicate to justice. "The galaxy owes you a debt of gratitude," the lead Council member said during the ceremony. "Without your efforts, the Syndicate's plans would have continued unchecked. You have not only saved Zeta 56, but the entire galaxy from their corruption." Despite the recognition, the weight of their victory didn't feel like a triumph to Zoran. As he stood beside Aliya and Evan, his mind drifted to the many lives lost in the battle against the Syndicate. The war wasn't over. Though the Syndicate had been struck a devastating blow, its influence still lingered, and its remnants were out there, waiting for an opportunity to rise again. As the ceremony concluded, Aliya's gaze met Zoran's. She could see the conflict in his eyes. "We've stopped them for now," she said softly. "But the galaxy's still broken. We'll need to rebuild." Zoran nodded, but the burden of his past and the weight of his decisions still hung heavily on his shoulders. "This isn't over. Not for me, not for any of us. But we've made a start." Their victory over the Syndicate marked a turning point for the galaxy, one that had cost them everything, but one that had changed the course of history. The damage was done, but with the Syndicate's control shattered, new opportunities for peace and unity could be born. The question remained, however, would the galaxy be able to recover from the scars left by the Syndicate, or would new threats rise in the wake of its downfall? Zoran, Aliya, and Evan had only just begun to answer that question. As they left the council chambers, ready to face whatever came next, they knew the war for the galaxy's future was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, there was hope. In the aftermath of their victory, as Zoran, Aliya, and Evan stood together outside the council chambers, a quiet sense of finality washed over them. The battle against the Syndicate had cost them dearly, but they had emerged victorious, exposing the criminal organization's deepest secrets and crippling their power. The galaxy was forever changed, though the scars of the war would not fade easily. Zoran, once a puppet of the Syndicate, now stood as a free man, though his redemption came at a high price. Aliya, still haunted by the ghosts of the past, had helped unearth a truth too dangerous to ignore. And Evan, who had once been a mere observer, had become a key player in a galactic struggle that would echo for years to come. Their mission was far from over. Though the Syndicate had fallen, the galaxy was still fractured, its trust in the very systems meant to protect it shaken. The three of them had struck a blow to the heart of darkness, but they knew that the fight for a truly free galaxy was just beginning. As they walked out into the uncertain future, one thing was clear: their journey had only just begun. With the Syndicate's reign shattered, they were left to rebuild what had been broken, to guide the galaxy toward a new dawn. Yet even as the future appeared brighter, the shadow of those who sought to control the stars still loomed large. The question remained: could they hold the line, or would new enemies rise in the vacuum left behind? Only time would tell. But for now they had won, and the galaxy owed them a debt it could never fully repay.